Right now, as you are watching this, the Persian Gulf is sitting on a knife's edge. President Donald Trump has just issued one of the most aggressive military orders of this entire war. He has ordered the United States Navy to shoot and kill Iranian small boats operating in the Strait of Hormuz. Not warn them, not intercept them, shoot them. And what makes this moment truly explosive is that Iran, the country that started this blockade, believing it held all the leverage, is now watching its own strategy collapse from the inside. The ceasefire is technically still alive, but the guns are loaded, the ships are moving, and the world's most critical oil choke point is one miscalculation away from becoming a full-scale naval war zone. Let's go back to where this all started, because without understanding the foundation, you cannot understand how dangerous today truly is. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a massive coordinated air campaign against Iran called Operation Epic Fury. The strikes targeted Iran's military facilities, nuclear infrastructure, and its leadership. In those strikes, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed. That single event changed the entire trajectory of the Middle East. Iran had lost its most powerful figure, the man who had guided the Islamic Republic for decades. But rather than collapsing, Iran responded with something the United States genuinely did not expect. It launched waves of missiles and drones across the region, hitting American bases in the UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain, striking Israeli cities, and in what would turn out to be the most devastating economic weapon of the war, it sealed shut the Strait of Hormuz. Now, if you don't fully grasp why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much, here is the reality in plain terms. Before this war, approximately 20% of the world's crude oil and liquefied natural gas passed through that narrow stretch of water every single day. Every major economy on the planet, Europe, Asia, Japan, South Korea, China, depends on ships moving freely through that passage. When Iran closed it, it did not just hurt American interests. It sent shockwaves through the entire global economy. Oil prices surged. Shipping insurance rates exploded, rising 4 to 6 times within a single week. Major container shipping companies, including Maersk, CMA CGM, and Hapag-Lloyd, immediately suspended all operations through the strait and related routes. Dubai International Airport, one of the busiest in the world, was hit by drone strikes and was forced to shut down entirely. Flights across the Middle East came to a near-complete stop. Fuel shortages began spreading across parts of Asia. The Trump administration had fundamentally underestimated Iran's willingness to shut down the strait before launching the war, a critical intelligence failure that would define the weeks of struggle that followed. Washington found itself in a position it had not prepared for. The military campaign against Iran had been designed to be swift and decisive, but the economic consequences of the Hormuz closure were hitting American domestic inflation targets hard, undermining one of Trump's core political promises to the American people. Through March, Trump tried a series of approaches. He claimed publicly on March 9th that Iran's military had been completely destroyed and that the strait had reopened, a claim that was false, as shipping data clearly showed the waterway remained blocked. He demanded NATO allies and China step in to help reopen the passage. He threatened in late March to destroy Iran's entire infrastructure, power plants, bridges, energy facilities, if Iran did not make a deal. None of it moved Tehran. Then came what looked like a breakthrough. On April 7th and 8th, a ceasefire was brokered, largely through the efforts of Pakistan. Pakistani Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif played a central diplomatic role in bringing Washington and Tehran to the table. The agreement was announced. An immediate end to hostilities, and Iran was to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The world briefly exhaled. Oil prices dropped. Markets stabilized. It seemed like the worst was over. It was not. By April 9th, there was no sign the agreement to lift the Iranian blockade was being implemented. Ships were once again being prevented from moving through the strait. Iran pointed to continued Israeli strikes in Lebanon as the reason it would not fully reopen the passage. The ceasefire was fragmenting before it had even properly begun. Then came the Islamabad Talks, the highest-level direct negotiations between Washington and Tehran since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The talks lasted 21 hours between April 11th and 12th, 2026, and consisted of 3 rounds of negotiations. The teams were reportedly able to agree on most points of a 10-point ceasefire framework, with the exception of 2 issues: the Strait of Hormuz and the Iranian nuclear program. The talks ended with no agreement reached and no memorandum of understanding issued. Vice President J.D. Vance, who led the American delegation, announced after more than 20 hours of negotiations that the talks had completely failed. He described the American side as having been flexible, while Iran had refused to accept Washington's terms. The single biggest sticking point, Vance stated plainly, was Iran's refusal to make any commitment to abandon its pursuit of nuclear weapons. What happened next was swift. Trump declared that he no longer cared about negotiations. He announced a United States naval blockade of Iran from April 13th, declaring that the U.S. Navy would prevent ships from entering or exiting Iranian ports and intercept ships that had paid tolls to Iran. The situation rapidly evolved into what analysts are now calling a dual blockade. The U.S. Navy blockading Iranian ports, while Iran simultaneously blockades the Persian Gulf itself. Two powers effectively choking each other's ability to move ships through the world's most critical waterway. Here is where things get particularly dangerous. U.S. military officials are now developing new plans to target Iran's capabilities in the Strait of Hormuz in the event the ceasefire falls apart entirely. The options under consideration include strikes with a particular focus on dynamic targeting around the Strait, the southern Arabian Gulf, and the Gulf of Oman. Potential attacks against small, fast attack boats, mine-laying vessels, and other asymmetric assets that have helped Tehran effectively shut down those key waterways. And then came Trump's most alarming order yet. He has directed the United States Navy to shoot and kill Iranian small boats operating in the Strait. This is not a warning shot policy. This is a standing shoot-to-kill order against any Iranian vessel deemed a threat. The IRGC Navy has already warned that any military vessel approaching the Strait will be considered a ceasefire violation and will meet what they called a severe response. The stage is set for a single confrontation between a U.S. destroyer and an Iranian fast attack boat to detonate the entire region. Meanwhile, Iran has been bleeding economically in ways that are becoming impossible to hide. Trump posted publicly that Iran is losing $500 million a day under the U.S. blockade. He claimed Iran's military and police were not getting paid, and that storage facilities at Karg Island, Iran's primary oil export terminal, were filling up to the point where Iranian oil wells would need to be shut down entirely, potentially causing permanent damage to Iran's energy infrastructure. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stated publicly that the Iranian regime was being held accountable for what he described as its extortion of global energy markets. Inside Iran, the picture is deeply fractured. Trump himself cited the seriously fractured nature of the Iranian government as a reason for extending the ceasefire, buying time for Tehran to produce what he called a unified proposal. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met with Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Army Chief Asim Munir in Islamabad as recently as April 25th, in yet another attempt to keep some form of diplomatic channel open. But the gaps between Washington and Tehran remain enormous. Iran is demanding sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, the release of $6 billion in frozen assets, an end to all U.S. and Israeli attacks, and war reparations. Washington is demanding Iran completely abandon its nuclear program, give up control of the Strait, and accept conditions that Tehran views as national humiliation. Military planners from more than 30 countries have been meeting at a Royal Air Force base north of London to put together a multinational mission to safeguard the Strait of Hormuz amid growing global concerns over oil prices and energy security. The fact that 30 nations are now involved in emergency planning for one waterway tells you everything about how far this crisis has spread beyond a bilateral U.S.-Iran conflict. The global economic damage is accelerating every single day. Asia is facing fuel shortages. European energy markets are in turmoil. Shipping routes that have operated for decades have been rerouted or suspended entirely. The ripple effects are hitting everything from petroleum products to clothing manufacturing to basic consumer goods. Every day the Strait remains effectively blocked costs the global economy billions. And the human cost, the crews of ships caught in the crossfire, the populations of cities that absorbed Iranian missile strikes, the civilians on every front in this war continues to grow. So where does this end? There are really only three paths forward from here. The first is a genuine diplomatic agreement. Iran agrees to meaningful limits on its nuclear program and surrenders control of the Strait in exchange for sanctions relief and security guarantees. This is what both Pakistan and China are pushing for. It remains possible but has eluded every negotiating round so far. The second path is a return to full-scale military conflict. The ceasefire collapses, Trump orders a resumption of strikes, and the U.S. military executes its plans to systematically destroy Iran's Hormuz capabilities. This is the path the shoot-to-kill order is pointing toward. The third path is the most dangerous of all, an accidental escalation. A U.S. destroyer opening fire on an Iranian fast attack boat, Iran retaliating, and a localized incident spiraling into something neither side can control. What we are watching right now is not simply a conflict between the United States and Iran. It is a stress test of the entire post-World War II international order. The rules that governed how great powers behaved around critical global infrastructure, shipping lanes, energy corridors, nuclear thresholds are all being renegotiated in real time under the pressure of missiles and blockades and shoot-to-kill orders. The world has not seen a standoff this dangerous in the world's most critical waterway since the Cold War. And unlike the Cold War, both sides here are not deterred by the threat of mutual nuclear destruction. They are separated by a narrow channel of water, armed boats on both sides, and a sitting American president who has shown he is willing to escalate further and faster than anyone anticipated. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a shipping lane. It is the pressure valve for the global economy. And right now that valve is about to blow. If you have been following this situation and want to understand what happens next when ceasefire talks collapse completely and the U.S. military executes its strike plans against Iran's Hormuz defenses, do you think Iran will back down? Or is this the moment Tehran decides it has nothing left to lose? Drop your answer in the comments because this conversation matters. The world is watching and so are we. Subscribe right now because tomorrow this story gets even bigger.